Having the thought or belief that poor people or certain people just shouldn't have kids is problematic and crosses blurry lines of eugenics when introduced in government spaces. So, how did former Peruvian dictator Alberto Fujimori disguise forced sterilization as family planning? Going back to 1990, Peru had already been experiencing economic and political conflicts, including threat of a terrorist arm seizing national control. Fujimori then began to engage in controversial actions in what he proposed was fixing the nation's struggles. Though once he had presidential power, he backed away from his campaign promises by implementing one of the harshest austerity measures seen in the country, which are economic measures to end long-run budget deficits, causing legislature to oppose his anti-terrorism strategies and began to investigate his corruption. This was the catalyst event. Fujimori then enacted a self-coup and abolished the Congress, constitution, and the courts, making him the sole ruler of Peru. Therefore, the rise of Fujimorism came to fruition. In the name of poverty reduction and modernization, the Fujimori regime initiated the National Reproductive Health and Family Planning Program in 1996. Officially, this program aimed to empower women with reproductive choices. However, as Jelky Boston reveals, it quickly morphed into a coercive state policy targeting poor Indigenous women under the guise of voluntary family planning. The program disproportionately impacted women from Quechua and Aymara speaking rural communities, who were often misinformed, coerced, or sterilized without consent. Many were lured with false promises such as food, access to healthcare, or even threatened with fines and withheld medical care for their children. This leads to my thesis. The Peruvian state's forced sterilization campaign under Fujimori represents a profound violation of reproductive justice with enduring consequences for the livelihoods, bodily autonomy, and generational well-being of Indigenous women and their families. Scholars like Ewig and Boston emphasize that Indigenous women were seen by the state as both reproducers of poverty and obstacles to economic growth. Population control then became not only about health, but about economic engineering and racialized governance. As Chaparro, Butiago, and Freeman state, quote, sterilization was not merely a medical act, it was a racialized intervention that treated Indigenous fertility as dangerous, unquote. Despite the devastating scale, over 270,000 women sterilized, accountability has been elusive. While Fujimori was tried for other human rights abuses, forced sterilizations have largely remained unpunished. And the effects of this continues for the survivors. Sterilized women often experience chronic pain, loss of menstruation, depression, and social stigma. Some lost their marriages, and many report feeling they had failed as mothers, not by choice, but by state intervention, as Chaparro Butiago states. Survivors organized grassroots movements to demand justice, framing their experiences within the language of reproductive rights and indigenous sovereignty. This is where the framework of reproductive justice becomes essential. Defined by women of color activists like Sister Song, reproductive justice goes beyond the narrow concept of choice to include the right to have children, to not have children, and to parent in safe and sustainable communities. The Peruvian state violated every single one of these rights. One woman interviewed by Balón Gutierrez, a Quechua speaker from Huancavelica, stated in her testimony, quote, they came only to our village, not the city, just here, where we were polleras. They told me, you already have too many. I said no, but they did it anyway. I think because I am Quechua, they thought I didn't matter, unquote. Another woman, Clara, recounted in Julieta Chaparro's Butiago ethnography how she was pressured into surgery at a health campaign in her village. She was in her early 30s and wanted more children. She said, quote, they told me it was required, that if I didn't do it, my children wouldn't get medical care, unquote. A third survivor, interviewed by Mariela Sala, described how health workers arrived unannounced and took women away. She explained, quote, "They didn't tell us anything. I cried and said no, but they had already given me the injection," unquote. Women were robbed of their ability to have children without consent. Violating the right to bodily autonomy, they were disproportionately targeted because of poverty, race, and language, stripping them of the right to be free from state violence. And their forced sterilizations fractured family structures and cultural transmission, denying their communities the right to parent and exist with dignity. The Peruvian forced sterilization program was not merely a tragic chapter of medical misconduct. It was an orchestrated campaign of structural violence rooted in racism, sexism, and state control. Indigenous women were denied the right to decide the future of their own bodies and communities. Another case documented by Sala, a woman testified, quote, "I was sterilized in 1997. I didn't know Spanish, so they never explained anything. They just told me to sign with my fingerprint. They knew I couldn't read. They used my language against me," unquote. Despite facing silencing, trauma, and institutional denial, some women have fought back, not only through courts, but through the principles of reproductive justice. One such woman is Victoria Vigo, a sterilization survivor who became one of the first to successfully win a legal case against the state. After being sterilized without consent during a C-section in 1996, she spent years documenting her story and working with feminist legal collectives. Vigo stated, quote, "I fight not just for myself, but for every campesina who was made to feel invisible," unquote. Her activism helped inspire the creation of Red Dress program like Kipu Project, where hundreds of women record their testimonies in their own languages. Projects like these are grounded in reproductive justice by centering survivors' narratives, creating community spaces for healing, and demanding systemic reform. As Chaparro Butiagro and Freeman write, justice for these women isn't just about punishment, it's about restoring the ability to shape one's future, to mother without fear, and to reclaim dignity stolen by the state. Thank you for listening.